Hi, guys. Welcome back to the Right Brain Podcast. I'm here with my dad,
Hey.
Dr. Robert Melillo. Hey.
Hi, honey.
Okay, so this episode gets me fired up a little bit because some people out there are like, I don't think that there's a difference between left brain and right brain because I heard one time on TikTok this, and I'm just like, I'll kill you if you try and come for my dad. But his approach is a lot more elegant, and he's just like, this is the research, thank you so much. Because I've seen people in your lectures even do that, where they're like, excuse me, I heard this, and you're like, cool, here are the facts, move along.
Right.
But anyway, we're gonna dive into that on this episode just because our main focus is obviously the right brain, and we want to explain what the left brain does and just make sure that everyone understands it, but also just make sure you also understand why it is such a important thing.
Right. Yeah, and because that's the thing. I mean, I get it. Like, my TED Talk was up recently, and it's gotten a lot of views. And then most of the people are like, "This is great. This is great. This really explains so much to me, and really explains me or my child or whatever." And then there's one person, the left brain, right brain is a myth. It doesn't exist. It's the whole brain. It's pseudoscience. And you look at that and you're like, okay, well, where is that coming from? And
Right.
so I did a deep dive into this at one point because, I can tell you that the understanding that the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere and that, that there is a difference, there's so much research and science underneath that, going back, really until starting in like really the late 1800s, 1890s, but especially in the mid 1960s in the United States, there were these researchers that did what was called split brain research. So split brain research means that there were people that had horrible epilepsy, seizures, and it's kind of like a fire. Like you get a seizure, it starts in one side of the brain and it would just spread to the other. And if it happens hundreds of times a day, it can literally destroy your brain over time. So it really can be a horrific thing, and medication may not affect it. So in the 60s in California, in Berkeley, there were three people mainly, a guy named Roger Sperry, Joseph Bogan, and Philip Vogel, who what they started to do was called split brain studies. They would literally cut the corpus callosum as this bridge between the left and the right side of our brain. And that's where some information can cross over, and that's where seizures can spread from one side to the other. So they said, well, what if we just cut it in half and we stop? We look at California, and obviously we've seen recently the wildfires and all the fires there. And so these guys were in California, and they knew that if you wanted to stop a fire, sometimes you would dig a big hole to prevent the fire from jumping from one side to the other. So they did that, and they literally cut some people's brains in half. But these people remained alive. They weren't damaged in any way. And then they studied them for years. And that's where a lot of this information came out of, because there was a lot of really clear stuff that came out. But there's so much research out there, and there's so much information on this. Again, it can be misinterpreted and misutilized, but the fact that someone comes up with the idea that the whole thing is a myth, to me was like, where did this come from? And then it became ubiquitous. So, we'll give you an example in a moment what would happen. Like if you were to Google search right now, Google left brain, right brain, what would come up is all these things saying that it's the left brain, right brain thing is a myth, and it's only one. Why don't you show that first page, actually? So, nope, the other one. So this right here. So if you did a Google search right now, right, it would come up like this: right brain, left brain, and it would come up and it would say, is it real? And it would say it's a myth. And they would say the left brain, right brain dominance theory has proven to be fiction more than fact, which is completely not true.
Yeah.
Right? But you're going to see this over and over and over. And I remember a few years ago, I was like, where did this come from? Like, because this is not what you would see in the scientific community if you went out there. You can do a search on anything on PubMed or whatever and look at right hemisphere or left hemisphere, and you're going to find constantly all these different papers coming out talking about the right hemisphere does this, or this part of it does this, or this network is lateralized. So I'm like, where did this come from to where this is where the average person is going to think? If the average person did this, like if they're listening to this and they say, oh, they're talking about this right brain, left brain thing. It sounds really interesting. I'm going to Google it. And they go and they Google it. It's going to come up saying that it's a myth, that it doesn't really exist. And I remember thinking, like, where is this coming from? I don't get it whatsoever, right? So I was able to trace it back to one paper. There was one paper. If you go to the next thing. So they talk about that. There was this 2-year study that was from the University of Utah where they looked at 1,000 people ages 7 to 29, and they were looking to see if, while they were reading or they were measuring, in the brain, and they wanted to see if they could see, for the most part, if people were more right brain or left brain dominant, right? So it really comes down to that they're talking about, do you have a left brain or right brain kind of style, like a personality, like we talk about, right?
Yeah.
And so they looked at this, and in this study, they weren't able to show from computer modeling that it seemed obviously that some people were more right brain or some people were more left brain. I mean, I could tear this research apart very easily by saying, of course, you were never going to see that in an imaging study, because there are these little subtle differences in the brain and in network, and you can have certain networks firing at different rates, but they're doing completely different things, complete opposite. And then, but even in the paper and in every article, it says right under here, like Jeff Anderson, the study's lead author and professor, said, it's absolutely true that some brain functions occur in one side of the brain, like language in the left and attention in the right, right? So the paper starts off by saying it's absolutely true that there are these right brain and left brain functions, but then it goes on to basically say, but when they did this study, they couldn't see in the imaging that any signature that would tell you if you were more right brain or left brain dominant. So from that, they concluded, they didn't really even conclude it in the paper if you read the paper, but people reading the paper concluded, oh, then it's a myth. There's no such thing. And it's really this one paper.
That's so crazy. And it just like snowballed from there.
Yeah, and if you do a Google search like I just showed you, all you're going to see is myth, 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 myth. It's not true, it's not true, it's not. And that is completely different than if you did actually like a literature search in the scientific research on right and left brain functions or hemisphere. You'd find millions of papers.
Well, even if you read the paper, you would find that they are saying that it's
exactly.
true.
Even the main article that really first commented on this, that was the first thing that said left brain, right brain is a myth. That was the title of the article. It starts off by saying, of course, the right brain and the left brain do different things. We know that, some things are in the right brain, some things are the left brain. And then it went on to talk about this paper and how it really is about that they couldn't see that there's a personality type one way or the other. But you really can't see any personality type. Like,
especially on a computer screen.
Yeah, like we know there's personality disorders, and we know that different people have different personalities, and there's different people that have talked about different ways of looking at that. But again, would you do through brain imaging? And there's one other study that I saw that was another thing that kept on coming out, which was unbelievable to me, that there was a guy at Harvard that did autopsies. And in the autopsy, supposedly, he couldn't see if there was a right brain or left brain personality. I'm like,
well, the person's dead.
Yeah, so. When they're dead, they don't have a personality anymore. But that's kind of the point. Like, just by looking at the brain and just by imaging the brain, and we do brain imaging, you can't tell the person's personality. You can't say that this person, unless you're really doing the studies with a specific reason, you can't say, oh, this person is good in math and this person is going to end up being an artist, or you can't see any of that.
Yeah.
With brain imaging, even the most sophisticated technology at this point, you could not see any of that. So the fact that they have this one paper, and from this one paper, all of that came. So if you're listening to this, and if you've Googled it and you've come up, you're going to see that it's all relates to this one paper from Utah, or from this Harvard study of somebody that did an autopsy on dead people and said that. Meanwhile, some of the best researches ever done were done at Harvard by two guys named Galaberta and Gershwin. And Gershwin, what they showed was that actually they did the first studies looking at dyslexic people. And they did this in like the late 70s, early 80s. And they actually did see a difference in their brain, physical difference in the brain of people with dyslexia. Most people, because most people have the language side of the brain on the left side, there's something called the planum temporale, which is an area on the left side of the brain that in the temporal lobe that is usually larger, that has something to do with reading, okay? And it's usually a little bit bigger on the left than the right. People with dyslexia had the reversed, where their planum temporale was larger on the right and it was smaller on the left. And kind of showing that, and they also in the research showed that these people were unusually gifted in right brain type of skills. And so even going back then, they did show that you could look at brain imaging and that there were physical things that you could kind of, if you really researched it and looked at it, that did distinguish that there were differences between, let's say, people that were right brain and left brain, or people that were dyslexic versus people that were not dyslexic. But the bottom line is, what I've been able to gather from it is, for some reason, it really irks people to think that there are right brain and left brain personality subtypes.
You think because it just makes it seem simplistic? When it really isn't simplistic at all. There's like you broke it down where now you have like so many subtypes of what happens in the brain, but like to just the everyday person who's not a researcher and scientist, it's like, yes, very clear, left and right brain are two different things. Now, here are all the details to it, but
right.
Yeah.
And I think it's also misinterpreted. Like if we read that article and we went down, they start talking about, well, because, yes, the left brain does language, but the right brain does certain types of language. So that's where they kind of looked at it in absolutes. And that's where it kind of went a little awry back in, after the 60s, and they did this split brain research. There was a lot of stuff that came out because this was like fascinating stuff. They were able to, show that the right brain and left brain did very different things from one another. And so it became very popularized and maybe oversimplified. So like, again, to say, well, the left brain does language. Well, the right brain does language too, but it does it in a different way. Both sides of the brain do everything. All areas of the brain can do anything, but the bottom line is that there are very specific areas of the brain on the right and the left that are specialized in different things. So like the left brain does verbal language, the right brain is more what we call nonverbal language, or it hears tone of voice, or it gives us tone of voice. So there are certain aspects of language and communication that are controlled by both sides and by the same networks on both sides, but one does mostly words and the other does mostly, non-words, facial expression, body gestures, tone of voice. But really you need both of those to come together. You can't have a normal conversation with anybody if you're not hearing words and also able to see their facial expression or tone of voice. I mean, both of those need to come together. So we do need the whole brain to work together, but the right brain and left brain do different things, and they're absolutely different. They view the world in a different way, and so we're all a little bit more one way than the other, and there are these and it does impact our personality.
Well, it just that alone, what you just said, makes so much sense, playing into personality types, like somebody who is maybe more a lot more left brain person, which you're saying is just words, and they have a right brain deficit, so their right brain isn't as developed, and that's social cues, that's reading the room, that's all of those things. Someone who's a lot more like literal person, or like a child with like autism who's not really picking up on the emotional cues that are going on, but they're hearing the words and they're taking them very literally. That's because of that imbalance, and vice versa. Like I'm someone that like will see someone give a weird look from like across the room and have a full panic attack about it, because I'm like, well, they might have said this word, but the way they said it means that they hate me. So
right. And so really,
did I explain that right?
Yeah, and that's the thing. So we know that. Like, I mean, you can't almost hear anything. I was just listening to, I forget, one radio station, and the person started to describe somebody and said, yeah, I'm much more of a logical person. I like to look at things really closely and analyze them. And, I take things step by step. And they're clearly describing what has always been looked at as a left brain style of thinking, right? And that's exactly how he described himself. Again, if we were talking about the reason why you wanted to do this was because you talk about the creative community and the people that are in that community, and they struggle with, certain things as well. And, but even if you don't have a deficit or you're not struggling, you may still have a personality that's more one way, a little bit more one way or the other. You might be a little bit more, left brain, a little bit more logical, or you might be a little bit more, emotional and really are driven by social interactions, but you may be fully functioning. It's just your personality. Again, you can have, as we said, right brain, you might be more athletic or a dancer, and that is what you love to do. Move your body constantly. You're very visual, spatial. Or you might be someone who loves to paint or draw or do that. Or you might be somebody who wants to invent something, or a designer of some sort that designs clothes. Little kids that might start to, you used to do this. You used to kind of design your own clothing. So did your brother to a certain extent, right? It was like just something that was in you that other kids weren't doing. And so, where do these traits come from? I always look to bring it back to the neuroanatomy. And that's why it's important. And there's nothing wrong with looking at it that way. But for some reason, again, people got offended by it. But it really, the only way to really see this at this point is behaviorally, meaning we observe it in people that this is the way it works. But we did studies, and there have been studies for years showing that these are what the left brain is typically more specialized in. And this is what the right brain is more specialized in. And then if you take extreme versions of those, you're going to get extreme versions of those strengths and weaknesses. And then that may actually fit into some sort of psychological diagnosis or something like that. That's the way I look at it.
Right. And then on top of that, I know that like you guys have been introduced to my dad probably through his work, but then also through me like promoting this on my stuff. So if you don't know what he does, he typically does work with kids that are autistic and on the autism spectrum. And so it further proves what you're saying. There's so much research that already proves that it exists, but that left brain and right brain are a real thing. But then on top of that, you work with kids every day who are autistic and have these diagnoses that you work to build up the other side of their brain, and then they're not diagnosed with that anymore. So your work itself proves that left brain and right brain is a real thing.
Yeah, and it's with all different types of things, not just autism, but also...
Yeah, I'm just saying that because that's a prominent thing that you work with.
Right, that's one of my main areas of research, and that's really the most extreme version of it, where, again, anybody that I think is on the autism spectrum is a genius, and their left brains are incredible. I have kids that are nonverbal, really that don't speak, can't speak, but can type, but learn how to type on a letterboard. I had an 8-year-old kid from New Zealand recently, and he started to be able to type, and the first thing he did was start to talk about quantum physics. They didn't think he could spell one word. Like, they didn't think he knew how to identify a letter. And then this kid starts spelling, and he starts typing in full sentences and talking about quantum physics, and he wrote down a word, and the mother was like, I don't know what this word means. So she said to him, what does this word mean? So he wrote a definition of the word. And the mom was like, I have no idea if this is accurate or not, right? This is way over my head. And she's like, this could be completely made up stuff that he said. It looks like gibberish to me. So she went to a friend of hers who was a physics professor. And she said to him, look at this word and this definition. Tell me what you think. And he said, yeah, whoever wrote this really knows a lot about physics. This is a very good definition of this word. It's very accurate. And he said, who did it? And she said, my non-speaking 8-year-old autistic child. And he said, there's no way. There's no way a child would know this. Like, how would he know this? She's like, I didn't think he knew anything. And now he's talking about quantum physics, right? This is just, there's so much we don't know. And it's crazy. Like, what we see when these kids who are non-speaking, when they, we should talk about, actually, there's a recent thing called the telepathy tapes. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's where they
Yes.
start. Yeah, we should go through that because it's really wild where they're doing these things with kids that are non-speaking autism, and they're able to they look like they're reading their parents' minds. And I've had many parents tell me that they won't tell anybody. They're like, I don't want to tell you anything, but my son, I think, can read my mind, because he answers me. And this 8-year-old kid actually said to the mom, she typed, and she was like, I want to speak with you so badly. And he laughed at her, and he typed, and he said, Mom, we don't have to speak for us to be able to communicate. He's like,
Oh my God.
there's
That's
there's like a higher way of us doing that, almost like that's so passé, right? But on the other hand, these kids that are typing out, most of them say over and over and over, please help me to speak. I want to speak. I want to speak so badly. But they're brilliant. They're what's
and that's
in them.
when they have a really, really high left brain, but their right brain is just a deficit. So it's I don't know, one side of your brain being in college and the other side being in kindergarten. And it's just because of that, it's not connecting. And that's why the verbal side isn't happening and all of those other things aren't happening. Right.
Yeah.
And that's why you build up the other side. Well, yes,
yeah,
that was
it's a little bit more complicated just because, again, the verbal part of the brain is there, and they can speak, and they can, but they're so disconnected from their body. They don't feel their body, that they literally, one is the right brain drives you to communicate. Why do you speak? We speak because we want to share experiences and relate to other people, and we want other people to like us and protect us, and that's what the right brain's all about, is being able to make sure that we survive, and that we're part of a group, and that we want to share things. And most parents that have kids that are non-speaking, it's not just that they want them to speak, because many of these kids may speak, or they may just say one word, and they only speak for needs. They'll just say water, food, bathroom. But they can speak. But they want a conversation. They want their kids to come home and say, this is what happened in school today, Mom. This is, my friend Jimmy, or whatever. I like this girl. And that's what they want to hear. And that is all driven by the right brain. The right brain drives that desire to communicate and speak. And also the nonverbal communication component of that. The left brain just has the words, really. And that's it. And so, there's so much more to it, but
that's so interesting.
It's so fascinating. And when you see it, the only way that it explains it is how this right brain and left brain thing works. Mm-hmm. And that's where, my book, Disconnected Kids, right from the very beginning, I knew that I was on the right track, because people would just come up to me and go, I read this book, and you just explained my child to me. Going through these right brain, left brain checklists, you just explained them, and nobody else ever did. He has all of these different symptoms, and there's all these things that he's really good at, and but he struggles in so many. And then you put it down, and it fits it perfectly, and it's just makes so much sense. And that's where I knew, and that's really the only way right now that we can prove the right brain, left brain thing. Mm-hmm. You're not going to be able to do it, because there's not really imaging sophisticated enough to really even do that. Because you could have, again, let's say a network on the right side of the brain that is at a certain frequency band, like a beta rhythm.
Okay.
And then you can look at it, and we do these EEG studies where we've done it with you.
Yes.
We put the cap on and everything.
Yes, I look gorgeous in that cap.
And so we can literally look at the brainwave activity, and we've published studies on that and everything. But you could have another network that's also in a beta rhythm, and one could be actively doing something, and the other one could be actively inhibiting something. So they're doing completely opposite things. One is working on something and doing something actively. They're both at a beta rhythm, and we would not be able to tell one way or the other. It'd be almost impossible to tell. I mean, with maybe really sophisticated equipment, you could look at that, but for the average, you wouldn't be able to tell a difference. You just see that there's these brainwaves. And so people will look at that and go, see, they're doing the same thing. Both sides of the brain are active. They're doing the same thing. And it's like, no, actually, they're doing the complete opposite thing, but they're both active at the same level, and they're both active at the same time, but they're doing literally like opposites. And that's where a lot of this confusion comes from.
Okay. Wow. Okay, that's a lot. And you've also now, I don't know if you wrote a new book on it or you are coming out with a new book on it, but you break down different, is it 6 different types?
Yeah, I mean, if I do a next book, which I'm not sure if I'm going to, it's going to be more of an adult book. It's going to be more kind of directed towards a lot of what we're talking about in this podcast to a certain extent. But yeah, so what I've tried to do is really break it down into like 6 different personality types on the right side and the left side. Because again, just saying right brain and the left brain is also, it is a little oversimplification, even though it's fairly accurate. And it really comes down to that difference because the right brain develops first in the first 3 years, and then the left brain, and that's what creates this dichotomy. And that's in our brain, and we know that that's really well documented, and that's what gives us this advantage. So, having a right brain, left brain that work differently, as you go up and look at different animals, the more sophisticated the animal, the smarter they are, the more their right and left brain are different than one another. And our brain, our right and left, are more different. And that's why it's so funny when you do a Google search and you'll read over and over and over that, no, that's not a thing, when it obviously is. And, that's where the risk comes also between the right and the left, because they develop differently at different times and they become more specialized, but they need to be able to always work together. And they should always be a whole brain working together, but they're doing different things. So, and what we're looking to do is really analyze that and break that down more than anybody else ever has, is take all of these different neuroanatomical spots. There's something called Brodmann areas. A guy named Brodmann in the early 1900s, literally with a microscope, looked at every area of the brain and mapped it out based on layers. He was pretty left brain dominant. And so we want to break that down even more into right and left brain functions. And so that's what we're working on right now.
Okay, amazing.
Yeah.
All right, so left brain and right brain is definitely a real thing.
Definitely a real thing. And I can tell you that, I think most of us should know that just because we Google it and it comes up doesn't mean that it's right.
You'd be shocked at the people that don't know that, but we're here to tell you.
Yeah.
So, okay. So this is, because we talk about this stuff all the time and I know people tune in at different times. So it's always good to just like have a basis of explaining what's going on, what it all means, why we're talking about the right brain. And we spelled it right brain because I'm talking about songwriting, but we're also talking about being right brain people.
Right. So there's that. Thanks to Paul. He gave us that.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah. But I think it's just, again, people need to not just Google something once and just look at that. But so if you're listening to this and it sounds right to you, and then you go and you find that it seems to be, everything in the Google is saying that, it's not true. Trust what you feel. Trust your own instincts.
Trust your gut,
if
people.
It makes sense,
and for yourselves,
as to who you are, and that's the bottom line at this point. And because it is about being able to help improve and become the best version of yourself, and really it comes down to how those things work together. And Disconnected Kids, my book that's out there, I think anybody at any age can read that book and really understand, because all of this starts in childhood, right? So in the first 6 years, this basically is going to determine the fate of your adult brain. Now, you can always change it, and that's another thing, that, the brain, there's something called neuroplasticity, which means that the brain is very malleable, and the genes that regulate brain growth and development are the most common genes that we have, but they're also the most sensitive to anything in the environment, and they're very easily changeable. So that's another thing, the idea that people say, well, I have ADHD and it's a lifelong thing and I'll never get rid of it and it's purely genetic, or I have this issue, I'm dyslexic and I can't change that. That's completely not true either, even though in Google that'll tell you that over and over again.
Well, I've watched you in person make that come true for a lot of people. So
yeah, it's like anything else, like you saying that, you can't get better as a songwriter, like or you're only born a songwriter and that's it, and you can never develop it. You can never develop that skill later on in life, or, it's ridiculous. It
Yeah,
doesn't make any sense.
anyone can do anything at any time.
Anything. And we're always doing anything. So we are, we create everything in our life, as you know.
Okay, so let's just take a little time to, like, if someone were to be reading your checklist of what the left brain and the right brain is, what is it?
Okay. So the right brain develops first, as we said, in the first 3 years. And because it comes online first, the right brain is really about attachment and attaching to our parents for survival and then attaching to other people. So it's very driven by social relationships, social interactions. And so the need to be connected with somebody else and protected by somebody else, that's the basis of attachment, is that if you're in danger, you go to somebody who can protect you. And the right brain is really the one that is the main part of our brain for attachment in general. But when we're developing the right brain, like in the womb, we're not seeing really clear, detailed vision. We're not hearing like really clear sounds, but we're hearing things and we're seeing things, but it's a little blurry and it's a little muffled, and we can hear tone of voice, and a baby can already react based on, what's happening. If his parents are, fighting and arguing and the mom's all stressed out, the baby can tell and gets a reaction to that sound and that tone of voice. If the parents are loving to one another and the mom is very calm and her body's calm and the baby's going to be calm. And so they're already developing hearing where they can hear tone of voice and relating it to emotional states and how they feel, whether they're happy or angry. So they're starting to also get the foundation of emotions. The right brain, again, we're not seeing clear, detailed vision. We're just seeing kind of blurred outlines. And even when we're first born, for the first 6 months, we're really not seeing much. So we're just seeing kind of outlines of gray and shapes of the face. And we can see some facial movement. Babies are drawn to that facial movement. So the right brain is more about getting the big picture. It's about being connected to our body, to our big muscles, getting us to really feel where we are in space. So it's more what we call spatial or visual spatial. The right brain does what we call interoception. Right from the beginning, a child needs to be able to tell the parent if they're in pain, if they're hungry, if they're thirsty, if they're hot and cold, if they need to be changed. And smell and taste are very involved with that. So the right brain is always takes the lead kind of in relating physically to our own body, feeling our own body, being connected to sensations, and then connecting to right brain emotions. So right brain emotions are emotions that are more about protecting us or relating to other people. So things like fear, being afraid, or having a sense of danger, sadness, so like a sense of loss of some sort, and shame, embarrassment, guilt, rejection, sensitivity, but also empathy and love and connection and attachment, right? So all of those are pretty much right brain emotions. Disgust, so also if we taste or smell or see something that looks disgusting, the right brain is more related to that. The right brain picks up on like unpleasant smells or so that we don't eat something that might be bad and we get sick and die. And the right brain just processes many different things at the same time, and it doesn't form conscious memories for the most part, especially in the first 3 years. So we all have what we call childhood amnesia. Nobody generally remembers before the age of 3 because we're only developing the right brain and we're not forming conscious memories at that point. Balance, coordination, our inner ear, our sense of where our body is in space, proprioception, all of that is more related to the right brain. So the right brain is the big picture. It's more emotional. It's more social. It's more especially what we call negative emotions, to be able to be what we call withdrawal behavior. If we're in danger, we're going to run away. We're going to go away. And that's pretty much how the right brain develops. Then the left brain comes in. And the left brain is more about, we start forming conscious memories. It's more about remembering details. We start to remember things. We remember facts. We start to accumulate more information. And now we take this information in. We start to put it into groups. We sequence it, so there's kind of a past, present, future. We use it for prediction. It's more goal-directed. We have a specific goal that we're going to go for, what we seek after. The left brain is more motor-driven, where the right brain is more sensory, more paying attention. The left brain is more about going out and doing something, so approach behavior. The right brain is linear and sequential and logical and linguistic, and so words and everything. So being able to move things fast, not just gross motor, big muscle, but small muscles, move them rapidly and quick in a sequence. And it's about learning certain patterns and then doing that over and over. The left brain likes familiarity. It likes to do the same thing over. The right brain hates familiarity. It likes what's called novelty. It's looking for newness. Things that are potentially dangerous are something we've never seen before, right? So the right brain really more is looking for new things all the time. The left brain is looking for familiar things and familiar patterns. And the left brain kind of isn't really connected to our body physically. It's not that interested in other people. The right brain lives more in the real world, where the left brain lives more in a virtual world, more like a theoretical world. And so the left brain, lives in kind of this echo chamber where it knows certain things and it doesn't doubt that it knows those things. And it just kind of reinforces that same knowledge. And that's why we say we're moving so much more towards a left brain type of world now, where the right brain questions everything and is always doubting things. And people that are right brain dominant always doubt themselves and are never 100% sure. People that are left brain dominant, hardly ever doubt themselves. They're like, okay, this is it. I mean, I know I'm right. And everything they look at, they reinforce that. And this is where we see people when they go on like the algorithms on Google or Instagram, they just see things that they believe in politically, and then they keep on getting reinforced with that over and over, and that feeds their left brain, and it feeds, I want to hear the same thing over and over and over, and I don't want to hear any new information. I don't want to hear anything that goes against what I already know, right? I just want to hear what I know, and I want to hear that over and over, and I only want to talk to people that I know. And if I have a family member that doesn't believe in me, believe in what I believe, I don't want to talk to them. So again, there's so many applications of this information. And the left brain is, more about remembering these facts. So the left brain is, everything kind of comes in through the right brain. And it comes in, is it safe? Okay, if it is, then it goes to the left brain, where the left brain kind of stores it and kind of puts it in a certain way and is going to use it to get a goal as a tool in some way. But then it has to go back to the right brain to put it into the context, the big picture of life and our life and what does it mean. And so the right brain is really that kind of wisdom, the understanding, intuition, where it's just, we just know if it's right or it's wrong, that type of thing. So that's kind of a quick synopsis of right brain, left brain.
Just a real quick. Okay, I heard like 7 words in there that I was like, what does that word mean? But I'll figure it out later. What were those words? Now I can't remember. One started with a P. I'll figure it out. I would think it was like brain terms.
Prosodity, maybe I said.
Maybe.
And again, I look at all psychological and personality types and everything is really just a mixture of those, and there's like an endless combination. So it's really much more complex, but obviously we try to make it somewhat simple. So we know that that's how it works.
Yeah. Yes. And if you guys look in his book, Disconnected Kids, there's a whole checklist where you can like check off things, and then maybe you'll figure out what you are if you haven't figured it out already from this. But okay, great. I'm glad that we ran through all that real quick.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So if you guys have any questions about if you're left brain or right brain, hopefully this cleared it up a little bit. If not, like I said, you can always send them to me on the Right Brain Podcast Instagram or email. And yeah, once again, thanks for being here, and thanks for listening with us.
And it is a real thing, and it's not a myth. And if you say that,
yeah, you punks. I'm kidding. No one's even said it to me.
We're coming after you if you say that.
Okay, cool. Love you.
Love you.